Good morning, good morning, good morning. At least from where I am especially pleased to have the opportunity to moderate this important conversation and just engage and partner with all of the talented folks that I've been able to come across since we began this series. And I'll open up with just a brief overview of what this series is, and then begin with introductions of our panelists. Um, a year of combating anti-Black racism. We we take the conversations about anti-Black racism from awareness to action, and from a focus just on safety to a holistic view on all the ways anti-Black racism shows up. Each month in 2020, we will host virtual global panels with rotating topics to explore how anti-Black racism manifests in the topic for the month currently, historical context, what is being done to move closer to equity at grassroots and policy level with regional examples, actions participants can take to eradicate anti-Black racism. And briefly, a couple of the goals is to provide participants clear guidance on what steps they can take to combat anti-Black racism, no matter where they are in the world and no matter the context. The second is provide a platform for those doing the work to reach more peoples. We have a fuller overview of the goals for and the aims for the Anti-Black Racism series, which will include in our takeaways. But to keep it moving and to jump right into our conversations, we have an awesome panel that I'm, again, excited to moderate. And I will speak to myself sort of last and begin with Indy to introduce themselves.
Hi, it's so wonderful to be here. My name is Indy Johnson. I'm a filmmaker. My pronouns are they and she, and I'm calling out of Seattle, even though I'm based in Atlanta. And I'm doing a lot of work around filmmaking for the TGNC community.
Thank you. We'll move to Nate Nichols.
Hey, Nate Nichols here. My pronouns are he and him, and I am based in Brooklyn. I have a creative agency and production company. We founded another company. It's really a brand platform that advocates for anti-racism in the advertising industry called Allyship in Action. And yeah, it's made to just apply pressure to the industry through the allyship army and ensure that there's equity being developed and pushed throughout, the entire industry and the ecosystem of advertising.
We have one more very, very special panelist we hope to have join us any moment now, or at least at some point during the conversation. I'm Isaiah Little. I am the founder, creative director of Gallery Retail and Note First Fridays. Gallery Retail is a creative service, pro-social creative service company based in Newark, New Jersey. And Note First Fridays focuses on hyper-local marketing and is a citywide arts festival May through September. My day job is in tourism, so we leverage creativity. I leverage creativity in my day job as well as the manager of digital marketing for the Greater Newark Convention and Visitors Bureau. It's early. So just to keep moving forward, I'm really, really, excited to have all of us here, whatever times of the day. So I think it's awesome to join you all and then have a dope conversation with no socks on.
Okay.
Is it that warm? I feel bad for your feet. It's cold.
I mean, listen, man, I'm in the shop, but I'm at home. Anyway. Let's just begin with, I guess, a regular, question we have from month to month. What is the current state of creativity for Black people in your region? And I'm going to begin with Indy.
So I would have to say, like, the current state for Black people right now is a mix of things, right? Like, there are Black creators who are branching off and making their own projects, are building their own companies, are no longer trying to go the studio route or the streaming service route per se, and are looking to expand like their own little empires, if you will, by teaming up together and creating content with each other instead of trying to network vertically, if you will. And it also feels a little difficult at this time. Obviously, like COVID is a big thing. It hit the film industry really, really hard. But especially in Atlanta, they are definitely taking like COVID precautions and whatnot to get people back on sets and working, being PAs and such. But it doesn't minimize the risk completely. There's still a virus happening, and people are also still trying to live their lives, make income. And that becomes more difficult when there's a pandemic in the midst of things. So I really appreciate independent creators taking time to pool their resources and also work with their fellow creators to make new things for us to watch in this time. I myself have like run sets during COVID, have been on sets during like this pandemic. And it's actually quite amazing, right, to see Black creators still out in the field, knowing that we have stories that we need to tell, things that we know are important, messages that we should get out, whether that be about, you know, the current social climate or Black futurism or however we want to spin it, that all of these stories are like extremely valuable. And the fact that it can still happen in the now is very important. But it is also at the same time under-resourced and undervalued by, you know, mainstream society, the larger cultural population that we have. So it's definitely like that kind of hole in the wall feel, like great things are being made, but it's also going unnoticed in certain ways, and it's also going invisibilized in comparison to like what is considered to be, you know, mainstream entertainment consumption.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. It definitely strikes a couple things for me. Nate, can you give your perspective on that? You muted, bro.
I am muted. Thank you. Excuse me. Indy, just I feel like I can echo where you were speaking to, because I know a ton of you know, younger creatives or people who are just now really applying their creative capacities in, you know, the production landscape or the advertising landscape, and it does feel like they're in a bit of an echo chamber in not having access to mainstream opportunities and not really truly, you know, seeing the residual effects of a year where people are like, hey, let's start centering Black people and hiring all of them. It almost feels like it like it was virtue signaling, right? We're at this space and place where there are just so many amazing, beautiful creatives who are not white dudes that aren't being seen, heard, or centered and elevated in their creative capacities. And where I sit in, you know, advertising and production land, you know, to your point, I've been on tons of sets. I've been, you know, we've been producing remotely. We did a remote production in Puerto Rico, LA, and Alabama in a single week. And we tapped local creators. So that was really, really wonderful. You know, and a brand tapped us to, you know, produce in 3 different markets, and understood that, you know, we couldn't be there. And in the brief, it was like, hey, could you hire local creatives? That felt really good for that brand specifically, and that brand specifically consistently gets it, you know. And I think there's this huge opportunity for us as a community, as folks who are really truly trying to strive to have equity in, you know, production landscape, entertainment, media, and advertising, to really just keep doing our thing. Because as more and more brands and more, you know, institutions and larger companies get it, you know, they'll see us, and I think the opportunities will come our way. I think it is taking longer than, you know, it should. And I think that like there are organizations like Allyship in Action that will continue to apply pressure to be like, hey, what are you doing to decenter yourselves as white dudes and white people and, you know, non-Black POC to like help elevate the marginalized communities that you so, you know, adamantly said you wanted to advocate for in 2020. And so I think we have to continue to apply pressure. We have to continue to create a way that's honest and reflective of us and our values and how we want to be represented in the world. And I think there are still brands that will, truly do the work to reflect us, like the Netflixes, like the Prime Videos, like, Foot Lockers. There's a ton of brands that are like really genuinely doing the work. Again, not at the pace that we would like. And on the other end of that, I feel like as I'm working with, more Black creators, more POC creators on my projects, contracting and developing my vendor list on projects, it's beautiful to just be in contact with, creators who are like, one of my mans is like 26 and from Baltimore, and he was working a full-time job at a startup that's like valued at like 100 million plus. Like, he's like, I've never like been in boardrooms with white people until I got to New York, started working at, X company. And then the first big national campaign he ever did was working with me. He never said a thing about it. He was working 40 hours a week while working on this campaign, like doing double extra overtime, like not saying a thing to just deliver on this project at a whole new level. And once he shared that with me, I was like, bro, I mean, like whatever you need, whatever question you have about bookkeeping, around financing, around client interfacing, around, designing your body of work to have a specific vibe and brand positioning in the market, I'm here for you. Zero questions asked. And so I think there's this beautiful opportunity for people like, Isaiah, Indy, and I to be able to show up in creators' lives to help them like mold and brand and position them better in the market, because there needs to be that as well. Like we can shoot them at the hip, but we definitely need to like understand how the market needs to see things so we can meet it there.
Can I chime in for a second?
Sure.
So yeah, I think you bring up a lot of great points. I think some of the things that resonate for me that I would like to comment on is like that feeling of being in corporate America, like as a Black person, as a femme-bodied person, as a person in the LGBT community, who doesn't receive the kind of recognition or respect for the work that we do in comparison to our like cis heterosexual counterparts. It's very dramatic. Like the scale difference, It happens very dramatically. And I just also want to, take time to think about like when working for capitalism. You mentioned your friend who is 26 working like 40 hours a week, like really grinding it in to make sure, that the project happens, which is amazing, right? And pulls it out and it's stunning for everybody. But also at the same time is working himself to the bone for, a company that does the CEO actually know that, his name?
No.
Does like, what are the true benefits that that person is receiving from working at this job that's not taking away from their livelihood? And I feel like when we think about these giant corporations like Netflix, like the Amazon Primes, like the HBOs, yes, they make very entertaining content. They do. They got that on lock. You can't deny it. But also, it's not taking an equitable look at what it means for people to be in front of the camera, behind the camera, in the boardrooms, in the advertising and media as things are getting created, because it's still mostly white people. And just, this is my own personal opinion. I'm not speaking for anybody else. I am tired of asking white people for anything. I don't want to sit in their boardroom at their table and say, listen to me, you have to give us opportunity. You must show us, the door. You must open a window. I'm so over it. White people have no interest in helping us. They have no interest in actually helping POC people, LGBT community, marginalized community, disabled communities, because the world has been made specifically for them to be comfortable. The world, right? Because they colonized so much of it, has been specifically made to be as comfortable to them as possible. So they have no interest in changing a world that feels so comfortable to them. Thus, I bring this up because I don't want to necessarily align myself saying that, oh, I'm, you know, just big corporation because I want to have a movie on Netflix, which would be amazing. Don't get me wrong, right? A check is a check to an extent, right? To an extent. But, you know, what am I sacrificing? What are the costs that come with, you know, me signing this contract? Who are the lives that also get affected? As a Black creator, like, we are oftentimes the ones who are affected the most and talked about the least, recognized the least, but experience most of the brunt of the not just the work and doing the work, but also the backlash when things don't happen well. And so, yeah, I just want to like encourage people to like network across and not necessarily trying to get into these boardrooms. You know, I think we see success stories like Issa Rae, right, who has created amazing content for HBO, started on YouTube, has done great things, but she's an anomaly, right? Like, it doesn't happen that way very often for most people in general, Black, white, you know, because the film industry is extremely gatekeepy. At least that's been my experience.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and so we look at these success stories and think that, oh, you know, it can happen exactly like this. But we also have to consider, like, she gave a very good piece of advice. She said, network across. It is about the people who are next to you. It is about the people who also seemingly have nothing, right? Who have talent, who have skill, who have resources at their disposal that can be pulled together for Black people, for, you know, people of color, for LGBT people, other marginalized groups, to create the stories that we actually want to see. Because all of this really does help shape the world, right? Like, from being in the boardroom with other executives, choosing what swatches and text and font look like, up to like when it'll be released, down to when the script of things was written, right? When the concept was made, when it came out of somebody's head. And there's such a discrepancy in between like those two points when white people get involved.
I'm only jumping in, Indy, because you ripping through my questions, and I want to make sure we like can parse them. I think that was phenomenal feedback from both of you, comments and perspectives. I'm gonna get my 2 cents on the first question, and I think just to kind of like circle back to at least part of the second question, because I think both of you touched on at least part of the second question. I definitely want to pull from both of those, you know, statements that at least in the region or the work that I work in, both public programming, consulting, to my work in tourism, I definitely see, especially, you know, Black folks doubling down on whatever their missions were prior. And in most cases, realizing, you know, that regardless of the trend, right, that, you know, the work that they were doing was important, and they're taking advantage of this opportunity, and more often than not. I think, you know, whether it be a grant program that should have always existed, whether that be the attention, you know, for Black lives, all Black lives, right? Whether that be supporting different businesses. I think that there's definitely been a lot of folks who I've come across and made aware of who've been taking advantage of it for the better or for their missions. And I think that that's been one thing that's been inspiring for me from, you know, Black Travel Tourism, which is an initiative or group that has gained a ton of momentum over the last 2 years, especially, and sort of like to continue back and throw it back to you all. Instead of speaking on some of the challenges, I think unless you can kind of add a new challenge, what are some of the growth opportunities, or how do these challenges kind of come about? New challenge or new opportunities?
You know, I think to Andy's point about reaching across, there's some magic around, you know, the fact that we are all now, like, it's the lines are clear. There's a very clear disconnect between people who have and people who do not, from even though just a work access perspective. And, you know, the more that the have-nots, so to speak, or the ones without access, come together to create their own ecosystems and their own systems in general to center and platform, you know, the work that they want to see in the world, the better. And so I think there is this amazing opportunity for that. And, you know, that's something we're doing right now. Like, we've designed a collective into our business model. Like, we want to center the marginalized, you know, and people who have desires, have passion, have very clear vision on what they want to create and put into the world. What would it look like to, you know, center them, and, you know, give them, share the access that we've sort of created and that we want to continue to garner with the work that we do. And so, like, the example of the gentleman who that was working full time, and decided to work on a project with us, you know, in his part-time hours. As soon as I realized what he was, you know, putting himself through, first off, it was like, bro, you should never have to do that, right? And how can I help you design systems and structure and processes so you don't have to do that, right? Like, what do you do now? And, like, what's the coaching and what do you need, you know, from me as someone who's been in this industry for, you know, a little over 10 years to be able to help support and help you build all the systems, whether it's an introduction to my CPA, whether it's looking at, you know, spreadsheets that I develop and allowing you to share them, you know, pitch decks, whatever. But just like sharing access to things in a way that's more meaningful and powerful as a collective, I think is super important. And designing it in a way that feels true to everyone's values, I think is so important right now. It's like, you know, we don't want people to feel like they are losing out on pieces of their livelihood because of the work they do ever. And that is a very, very, you know, important value that I think we walk with. And, you know, the more you put that out into the world, the more, you know, people who resonate with that will join with you and do that work. And I think, you know, the challenges is being able to, like, pause and actually look and do the work to actually build community as well. So it's like not just giving your all to, you know, maintain your livelihood, but also just like pausing, taking a breath and recognizing where you are, honoring where you are mentally, emotionally, and physically, and being like, I can't do this, you know, all on my own. No one can. And, like, where can we build? Like, where can we spend time and invest our energy to build deeper, meaningful, you know, value centering, you know, relationships to advance together. And I think that's something that, you know, 2020 really, really reinforced for us, to your point of doubling down on values, you know, I think that's super important for us from a growth perspective and challenge. I think the industry is, you know, advertising industry specifically, and I think the production industry, and, you know, I'd love to hear your opinion on that, perspective on that too. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
Indy,
yeah. So, like, I would like to echo a few sentiments. Definitely building community is a lot where the growth is. Like, that idea of working with people who aren't necessarily, like, how do I say it? You know, already in the boardroom or already having a, you know, a door open, whatever the case, however you want to put it. But working with your friends, like creating things with people who you already have connections and relationships with, building a foundation, right? Because any of these fan bases, any of these giant projects from showrunners, all, you know, they had to create with their own silo of people, put something out into the world. And then eventually, you know, they found more folk who resonated with what they were creating. And like you said, they, you know, came together. And maybe these people were more resourced than a lot of our marginalized communities are, but also considering that they are not resourced at all, right? Like, there are things that totally exist, you know, whether that is just somebody's skill or whether that is, you know, some type of financial gain that another person may be able to offer to a project. But, you know, the growth is here, right? The stories are being made. There are things that we have not seen, scripts that have been written and have yet to be written, that can still change this world, right? And so it's really about like us as viewers and as audiences, like seeking out different as well, right? It's not just gonna pop up on Netflix on its own. It won't just like show up on HBO Max on its own. They look for very specific content. So as a viewer, as a Black person, as, you know, somebody who is also searching for how can I better plug into the change that's happening in the world, is to actively go outside of, you know, what I may consider my comfort zone and, you know, search for those things, right? Like try to find independent platforms with independent artists that, you know, resonate or are doing the kind of work that resonates with you. Also, like getting into organizing specifically in your community. Like, I feel like we live in a day and age where it's normal not to know your neighbor, right? It's normal not to know the person who lives right next door to you. They could have a completely separate, different life, and y'all could never speak. That's been normalized. There was a point in time where you knew everybody on your block, where everybody knew who kid that was, and if somebody got in trouble, you know, it was a whole system, right? It's another system that was created that got, you know, disbanded for very specific reasons, because when you stick together, it's a lot harder to pull us apart. But if people are operating on an individualistic, you know, focal point, fundamental, I don't even know how, not even the right word, right? But if they're operating fundamentally from an individualistic standpoint, then the idea that they're going to grow with other people is probably pretty small, right? Because you're not doing it in the community, right? Growth requires you to move outside of yourself. It requires you to seek other things beyond your own knowledge and your own understanding, but also being like open and willing in your mind to experience things that may have been taught to you as taboo, conditioned you as wrong, conditioned to you as like something that should be shamed in society, right? Because that is part of the box that keeps all of us, you know, doing the same song and dance, as opposed to like actively trying to break the box. Like you have to make a personal decision to move outside of the expectations that other people have set for you and expectations that you have set for yourself to live how people have expected of you. And that definitely includes in the creative industry. We create content that shapes the world, right? Like what we make, especially in marketing and advertisement, causes people to influence, right? It influences people and gives them ideas and perceptions about the way a thing works or the way it is positioned in the world, however that is, right? That's why we have such a big problem with the lack of like really diverse Black and POC stories in media, period. And so when we consider like as people who create content, either that's for a living or as a hobby, then we have to go, okay, if we're looking for growth, if we're looking for opportunity in our community, like you said, we need to create that opportunity for ourselves. So if you have something and you are resourced in a certain way, then you can help other people who are not resourced in the same way, right? If you are somebody who has like a platform, but you don't really have the thing that you want to say, then you can find that, right? And like make those connections, join those things, and actually create based on that. And I feel like that is where our growth lies. But I also want to say,
go for it.
It also lies specifically in community and not trying to reach outside of the community. And when I say the community, I mean like whatever your margin, you know, whatever your group is. If that's LGBT, if that's you know, just a Black Indigenous person, if you are, you know, whatever the case, if it's not happening with people who look like you, then you should make it happen with people who look like you. Like we all have to make our own decisions to participate.
I think that definitely just that very, very last point brings to mind at least one, I guess, guideline in Paul or Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals on allyship, where ultimately you, and that funny Nate is on here. I didn't even think about Saul Alinsky before, but ultimately it speaks on, you know, basically being not careful, but being, you know, intentional on partnership and allyship, and aligning on, you know, missions, where you don't seek allyship unless it's definitely something that both parties, right, are going to receive benefits from. I'm not, don't quote me on the whole thing of Saul Alinsky. We've been using Cliff Notes for years. Go get it, Wikipedia, that thing. But just very quickly, I think I'm always, a lot of my work is around culture, aiding in shaping culture, especially locally. I think that's always one of those things that come to mind when we talk about gentrification. And I always look at, you know, cities like DC, cities like New York City, where they still have a brand, a culture, no matter, depending, some of them, right? But I think even technology is another example where it's eased life. And I'm sure other activists and organizers wish they would have had platforms like this to organize. And it's very important for us to participate in the shaping of new technologies also. So I think that that's definitely one of those things that is a great opportunity, right? Culture and technology. I won't speak to how I feel the government should be aiding and protecting people with new technologies, but it leads me to my next question. What are things people, organizations, and or the government are doing to address disparities and opportunities? Just a heads up, we have like 10 more minutes for this section of questions. So we want to keep it short to kind of go through at least one or two more questions before Q&A. So I don't know if Nate, you want to jump in this time?
Andy can go first. This is a tough one. I'm not gonna.
Okay. So what I kind of want to talk about is I'm doing a project right now called Sweetness, and it is specifically talking about domestic violence against the TGNC community. It's about a Black trans woman who's been in a romantic relationship with a Black man, and he has abused her in more than one way, and where eventually she has to find her way to safety, like outside of this relationship. And I bring this up because when I think about how do I say this? When I think about like the idea of opportunities and what people are doing to help shift the way the landscape looks right now, I think about the stuff that we're actually not talking about enough, right? Like this is combating anti-Blackness, specifically around creativity. And I want to talk about that anti-Blackness that Black people have in the Black community against trans and TGNC people. Like, it's a real thing. And it comes from many angles, right? Sometimes it comes from parents, sometimes it comes from partners, other times it comes from friends and co-workers. But when it comes to this story, it's specifically around men and their attraction to trans women, right? And how there have been well over 70 Black trans women, and I'm just specifically talking about Black trans women at the moment, because that's what the story is about, but it's been more than just Black trans women. It's also been trans men, it's been other trans people of color. Who have been murdered, who have been beaten, who have been disrespected daily since, well beyond 2018, but it was over 70 women killed in 2018. And so, yeah, I just want to like bring like that, like people are not asking those questions to themselves. Like, why are we acting this way towards people who look just like us? Why are we, segmenting the Black experience to be like, oh, well, you can be like masculine and Black, but you cannot be feminine and Black. You can be, you know, fat and Black, but you cannot be fat, feminine, and Black. You can be, you know what I'm saying? Like, it comes with all these restrictions. And I feel like people are not having those tougher conversations enough in order for us to like really combat that anti-Blackness, right? Because we have to check ourselves. It starts at home, right? Like, did I say something that was transphobic? Did I say something that was homophobic? Did I say something that was anti-Black? Did I say something that was anti-Asian? And the answer is, you already know the answer. You know the answer because you had to second guess that thought. You were like, you know, maybe that was a little side eye, but you didn't say nothing because you were, you know, never said it was going to shame you or somebody was going to be like, oh, you know, you're a problem because X, Y, Z. And it's like, no, we all need to learn. We all have unpacking to do. Even as a trans femme person, I still have transphobia that I have to unpack because there are things that have been conditioned that I don't understand, that have like been woven into my life that don't make sense. Right? That tell me the opposite of like who I am. And I have to like unlearn those things and not just accept what has been taught to me. Right? I have to go and discover and seek out for myself. And so when it comes to like these opportunities of like, what are we doing in the community? There are not enough Black men talking about their attraction to trans women. It's not happening. There are not enough Black cis women who are talking about their fellowshipping or their sisterhood with trans women. It's not happening enough. There is a stigma. There is a like happening around the TGNC community as if you are LGBT, then you LGBTQIA plus, then you can't be also Black. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I'm Black. I'm very, very Black. I've been Black my whole life, right? I've also been feminine my whole life. And I've also had a smart mouth my whole life, right? And so that, you know, like that intersection of things has caused, you know, me to like really reassess what the world looks like and how I move in space with people, right? Because we're not always considering how we move in space with the next person, right? It's just about very individualistic, oh, you know, me, how can I feel as best as I can, as opposed to thinking about it collectively, community-wise. Yeah, and just also like having those conversations with your people who are close to you, who you don't know how to have those conversations with. Like those are the ones that we have to have, but people are avoiding that because they feel shame. It feels difficult.
Thank you for that. Nate, you want to jump in there?
It's such a big question. You know, we could have spent the entire panel talking about this question.
We could have.
And responding with, you know, our lived experience and contextualizing it, and, you know, sharing sentiments with Indy and like echoing off of it. Like, I just wanted to talk about like my experience being a Jamaican, second generation in America. My family all coming from JA, and the extreme amount of homophobia, you know, in my family, and me having to push my uncle in all of my family to be like, why, what is what conditioning, why, you know. And I'll never forget this one moment where I was dating a woman. She was in Chicago, I was in Philly, and, you know, she was bi, and I just didn't have any challenge with it. It was just like, was what it was. And, you know, I'm just honored how and who and whatever her lived experience was. And, you know, that was just our relationship. And I'll never forget sharing my uncle with that. And he is like, he just had this visceral, like, what? And I'm just like, bruh, I like pause him mid, like, visceral reaction and be like, she's probably kissed more women than you have, so you better slow your roll. He let out this big laugh, and he's like, damn, man, never thought about that. Just like this first thing for him to like start to uncondition himself. And like, just hearing you speak, Andy, it's just like, man, it's just so much to learn and grow from. And, you know, for me, where I think government and systems it just needs to be a lot more personal growth, like, questioning yourself and reflecting on your conditioning and reflecting on your culture's conditioning and all the different aspects of life that, like, again, inform the context of your lived experience. And I'm part of a couple initiatives where they have like executive leaders from all like Verizon and all these big brands. And it's just so funny to see how like there was like 20 of us in the first session. That's supposed to be like these 4 meetings across, once a month. And now there's like 3 of us. It's like everyone's just given up on this concept of like decentering themselves and building out a new way of showing up to change social justice and change environmental justice, because that was the ethos of the executive leadership program, and just everyone just sort of tapered off because, again, this, to Andy's point, this world is built for them to feel comfortable. They're like, they keep asking me, what's your environmental justice, thing? And I'm like, I can't prioritize the environment when my people are dying, when like my mother, has been challenged with, her challenge of her lived experience dealing with postpartum when I was born and still recovering, 33 years later. I can't prioritize environmental justice over social justice. I just can't. And it's so interesting to me that they keep pushing me to like prioritize this community that's trying to like make the world a better place. It's like, this is me living, and it's the company is like ran by a white dude, and it's like, it's like, guys, help me to help you then. Like, if this is what you want, I'm not going to budge on what I care about and what is important to me. So how about you make some time to show me how my priorities and my people's lived experiences, are intertwined with environmental justice. And so, to answer that question, I just think a lot of people need to do their own work and, really understand what about their lived experience can they really grow from? Because it starts with that. Like, your conditioning is what informs your behavior and how you react to other people's behavior and how you show up and inspire and motivate other people to change their behavior. And so if they're not changing as individuals, the systems, the government, ecosystems, corporate America, none of that's going to change. It's all for nothing.
So I'm gonna skip one question and go to the last of our prepared questions so we can have some room for Q&A. How can people support your work and the work of other great leaders in this space? We have like a few minutes for this section. So Indy, you wanna give us a minute and a half on that, or a minute?
Sure. So you can follow me at _independent on Instagram. You can also go to sweetnessthefilm.com to check out the donation links for my latest project, which is, Sweetness. And then there are some amazing orgs that you should also check out. My sister's house in Memphis is specifically creating a tiny home project, giving housing to Black trans women in the area. There's also House of Tulip, another house cooperative that's happening in New Orleans for TGNC people. So that would be a great place to reach out to. And then also House of Pentacles, which is a cohort of Black trans creatives, all creating like documentary work and other content that you can plug into, give to their Patreons, whatever the case, to help create more of their work. So there's just some of the places you can plug into.
Thank you for that. Nate?
So we have, you can follow our creative agency production company at Palette Group. So Palette, PALETTEGRP.com. Same on Instagram and Twitter. And then Allyship in Action, we've decided to, continue to activate, we call them the Allyship Army, people who are non-Black, non-disabled, just everyone who has access to privilege, basically, by any means, to support and center those who don't have access to privilege. And with that said, we're developing these things called project pods based on, objectives that we want to see happen in our industry and the one big one we're doing this year is a workplace culture brief. So what are the incidents of harassment that are happening that are going unreported every single day, even working from home, from emotional to, physical to mental, from people still coming to work 60 hours as George Floyd's case is ending last week. Like, this is abuse. It's people should not be having to work nonstop and overtime during such a emotionally troubling week. And we want these things documented because there shouldn't be an excuse of what harassment looks like and what the work environment looks like. And so we want to be able to paint that picture. And so project pods are an ability for anyone who has a creative capacity, whether it's filmmaking, copywriting, strategy, to be able to jump on this project and design a portion of the campaign that fits them in the time that they have to support more equity in our industry. So we're launching project pods later this week. And so allyshipinaction.com, allyshipinaction on Instagram, allyship.action on Twitter.
So thank you for both for those resources. I'll make sure that there are links to all of those things in our wrap up and our key takeaways. I will add one my own. You can just check out Gallery Retail's Patreon so you can support the work that we're doing locally in the greater Newark area with our Newark First Fridays Festival, as well as soon as we launch our web series, Black Ass Place, where we focus on the historical and cultural significance of various places around the world, the blackest places in the world. It's a travel show, and that'll be releasing hopefully this summer. And just to kind of keep moving forward, we have 9 minutes left. So we'll take 5 minutes for Q&A from the audience. If you want to put your questions in the chat. Take 5 minutes for Q&A, and then we'll wrap with our closing statement. And there's an optional breakout sort of like discussion, that again is optional. So if there are any questions, we have something in the chat. Okay, so we have a question from Craig. Do you think that some of these long-held views and stigmas within the Black community might limit your ability to build the kind of nuanced content that you're exploring? Or will it be a case of art influencing the culture? Either of you can kind of take that.
I like to believe that it'll be art influencing the culture because a lot of people also claim that, oh, I don't know, a trans person. I never met, a trans person, blah, blah, blah. And truth of the matter is you probably have. One, they probably just feel unsafe to let you know, or they can't live openly for whatever reason around you or a specific environment, whatever the case. And so like us getting together to create content to actually show that visibility. I was actually a part of a program called Visionary Justice Story Lab, and we did a series called Resisting Narratives of Erasure, right? Because stories are literally being created with very siloed characters for very stereotypical stereotypes, I'm sorry. And that is what's being circulated the most. So that's what people like also want to believe. And that's what, it helps influence perceptions. And people think, oh, you're supposed to be this way, X, Y, Z. But it's because we are not the ones creating our own stories given to the mainstream media, right? It's happening from cis white men, cis white women who come in and are like, oh, you have a great story. Totally, let me tell it. It would be great. People will want to listen to it. And it's true because that person saw that this story was important and wanted to listen to it, but wanted to put their own little spin on it, right?
That's like move. Sorry.
Right. Wanted to put their own little spin on it and make it into something that it wasn't, right? And not giving like a true accurate representation of what's actually going on. So I do believe that as we get together and we create the stories that we want to see, inevitably we will just have more, right? It's not that Netflix is going to stop creating, stories that are anti-Black. I don't think they're going to stop that. It's not going to happen. But it does mean that we can live in a world where Netflix isn't the only power in the world that is creating story, right? That independent artists are creating their own things, that it is being shared widely, that people are actually seeking out content that is different from what we have been conditioned to like. Because you don't know what you like until you go and try it anyway. So once we go and try the independent content, we may find that these different, more broad perspectives are can help influence how we feel in our perceptions of what's going on in the world.
Thank you for that, Nate. I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
Just doubling down on your sentiment earlier, Zay, when you were mentioning how how that ship's about when people arrive in a mental and emotional space where they're going to be intentional with designing the bridge between their culture and their lived experience to create change in their community. And you're always going to be hit with challenges from your family, neighbors, etc., on honoring other people's lived experiences. However, you shouldn't stop. That is like what shouldn't happen, right? You should still figure out how to reach across and find the right relationship. One of my mentors used to say, if you can't change your people, change your people. And so simple. It's not easy, but it can be simple.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, I have one question myself for the panel. Thank you for that question, Craig. Is there a good book that you're reading currently? And if you aren't reading a good book currently, the last good book you read? And if you haven't read a good book in forever, the last great piece of film, last great film you watched, but definitely book first. Can you tell us the title, who wrote it, and yeah, that's it. Just the title, who wrote it.
This gentleman, Hanif Abdurraqib, I can't pronounce his name. I murdered his last name. Sorry.
Good try.
Yeah, a little devil in America. Such a beautiful book, just honoring Black performance and the rituals and the joy and the sadness of Black performance throughout history. And it's just wonderful. Just like the vignettes of Soul Train and what that meant to Black people in America, and then vignettes of Aretha Franklin passing and what that meant to Black people in America. Oh, it's just such a fun book. You just laugh out loud. It's like you're talking to one of your homies on the corner on the block.
I love
it. It's really fun. So a little bit Devil in America.
We're gonna add that too. Indy.
So the current book that I'm reading is Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Obviously, it's a classic. Many people love this book. It's been giving me a lot of different insight into just kind of how Black American men are conditioned, what kind of, and obviously it's not for everybody, and it's a very aged book, but just it gives me insight into, parts that I don't get to see very often. I think it's a wonderful read. So if you haven't read it, you should obviously read Giovanni's Room. And then a show or a movie that I've also been watching is called Disclosure on Netflix. Okay. It's specifically about what storylines look like for TG&C people in mainstream media. And so if you're somebody who is interested in expanding your knowledge base and especially around the TG&C community, that's just a good place to start. It's not where it should end. Don't just watch the movie and be like, okay, that was good, now I get it.
I'm learning.
It requires much more work than that, but it's a good place to just reference and kind of start your journey on really thinking about what narratives do psychologically, what narratives do for perception when it comes to influencing reality, and what stories do when it helps to propel our own lives forward, how we use those life lessons that we get from stories and apply them to our own situations. You can find it in a documentary, but you can also get it in this book.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to add all of those to our takeaways as well. I got one book the cover might look a little crisp, but I have it in a PDF as well. So I've been like ripping through this, but this is the Black Panther Party service to the people's programs. So it's all of their like core programs, and not just what they did, but also like how they ran it on down to like how much it costs. So I really like found this book to be
That's wild.
phenomenal, because it is almost like these are the actual documents they would have sent to different chapters to get started on, you know, the People's Cooperative Housing Program, literally the Sickle Cell Anemia Research Foundation, and like how much to the dollar that they spent to like stand these programs up. And I think it just speaks to how organized they were, and how they were leveraging, you know, the levers of capitalism for their very not so capitalist goals. So with that, I'm gonna have our closeout statements, and then, you know, as we said before, there's an optional conversation afterwards. Thank you all. To our panel first, you all are amazing. I appreciate all of your work. If I wasn't familiar with you before, I definitely am a fan now. And then all of the folks who joined us, whether it was evening, whether it was 8 a.m., I appreciate your time. This work is very important, and it's not, you know, something to just happen, you know, when something makes the news, right? It is something, you know, as was shared from all of our panelists, is basically an everyday journey, an everyday struggle. Whether you are someone of a marginalized community, whether you have any resemblance of privilege, it's an everyday sort of struggle. And yes, we remind you so that you're receiving the recording of this awesome conversation following after this conversation. We'll be summarizing a bit more of the takeaways in our key takeaways document. Thank you all to the panel for completing or helping us add your own words to that document. And next month's conversation is around migration and immigration. And the last thing you'll also include in there is a feedback form for this specific conversation. How can we do better running these dialogues? How can we continue the work outside of, you know, these conversations? And I think Indy definitely touched on it, where if we're having these touch points in building community, especially across the diaspora, it makes the work less work and a lot easier to do, because we've put in, you know, invested that time. And to our panel, appreciate you. As we all know, we live in a capitalist system, so time is money. Definitely appreciate you for making the time and paying forward all this beautiful information. Folks are welcome to hang around. It is not, you know, an obligation, but if there are any additional things you didn't get to say, we'll be around, but we will stop recording.